Look around you for a moment. How many skills are you trying to improve right now? Maybe you're learning a language, trying to get better at public speaking, or working on your fitness. Now ask yourself this: how's that going for you? Are you seeing the progress you hoped for? Or does it feel like you're constantly pushing a boulder uphill, exhausted and frustrated at how little you've moved? Maybe you think you're doing everything right. You've set ambitious goals. You've cleared time in your schedule. You've even told friends about your plans to hold yourself accountable. But something isn't working. There's a voice in the back of your head whispering that you're not making the progress you should be. You ignore it because facing it would mean confronting an uncomfortable truth. Maybe you're making this all way harder than it needs to be. Let me be clear with you. It doesn't matter how determined you are or how many motivational videos you watch. If you're using the wrong approach to skill development, you're setting yourself up for failure before you even begin. The harsh reality is that willpower eventually runs out. Motivation fades. And when they do, your ambitious plans crumble like a house of cards. Think for a moment about all the skills you've tried to learn in the past. How many of them did you actually master? How many times did you start strong, full of enthusiasm, only to give up weeks or months later? Your answer is probably uncomfortable to admit. The real danger isn't that you lack talent or intelligence. It's that you've been sold a lie about how skill development actually works. While you try to transform yourself overnight through sheer force of will, others are quietly making steady progress, using an approach that almost seems too simple to work. They're creating results you can only dream of because they understand something you don't: the transformative power of small, consistent actions. Right now, as you listen to this, you could be making your journey infinitely harder without realizing it. Not because you're incapable, but because you still believe in the myth of overnight success and dramatic transformation. The truth is much more subtle, much more powerful, and it has a name: Kaizen. But tell me something. When was the last time you celebrated improving at something by just 1%? You probably can't remember. And do you know why? Because we've been conditioned to dismiss small improvements as meaningless. This mindset is the real enemy, not your ability to learn or grow. Look at anyone who's truly mastered a skill. Pay close attention to their journey. They didn't get there through occasional bursts of intense effort. They got there through consistent, incremental improvement that compounds over time. Are you ready to accept this uncomfortable reality? Or would you rather keep pretending that your current approach is working? If you decide to accept the challenge of transforming how you approach skill development, get ready. The path isn't immediately exciting or glamorous, but it's the only one that consistently works. True skill mastery has never been about dramatic breakthroughs. It's always been about small steps taken without fail. Now tell me, do you want to keep cycling through the same pattern of initial enthusiasm followed by burnout and abandonment? Or are you willing to become someone who quietly, steadily becomes impossible to ignore? Every time you make a tiny improvement in any skill, something powerful happens in your brain. A small neural pathway strengthens. It's barely noticeable at first, just a slight feeling of things becoming a bit easier. You might dismiss it as insignificant, but something profound is happening beneath the surface. Have you ever wondered what occurs when these small neural changes accumulate over weeks, months, and years? The result isn't just linear improvement, it's a complete transformation in how you perform and how you perceive the skill itself. What once required conscious effort becomes automatic. What once seemed impossible becomes your new normal. And here's what's fascinating. When you focus on tiny, manageable improvements instead of dramatic leaps, you bypass the psychological resistance that derails most people. Your brain doesn't trigger the fear response that typically accompanies major changes. There's no anxiety, no overwhelming pressure, just a simple, doable step forward. Did you know this approach has a name and a rich history? Kaizen, a Japanese term meaning change for better, emerged in Japan after World War II as they rebuilt their industries. While American companies often sought revolutionary changes and breakthrough innovations, Japanese manufacturers like Toyota focused on making thousands of tiny improvements to their processes. The results were staggering. Within decades, they transformed from producing low-quality goods to setting global standards for efficiency, quality, and innovation. This wasn't just a business strategy. It was a philosophy built on a profound understanding of human psychology and the mechanics of sustainable change. And it's applicable to every single skill you might want to develop. Think about it this way. Would you rather improve by 1% every day consistently, or aim for a 30% improvement once a month and likely give up before you get there? The math makes the answer clear. That 1% daily improvement compounds to yield a 37-fold improvement over a year. The occasional big push, even if you could sustain it, can't compete with that kind of growth. Let me give you an example that will make you a bit uncomfortable, but it's necessary for you to hear. How many times have you decided to get in shape, started an intense workout regimen, pushed yourself to exhaustion, felt sore for days, and then gradually reduced the frequency of your workouts until you stopped altogether? How many times have you tried to learn a language by studying for hours in the first week, only to abandon it when life got busy? That feeling of failure isn't accidental. It's the direct result of misunderstanding how sustainable skill development works. Most people think the solution is to find even more willpower, to push even harder the next time. But they're deeply mistaken. Want to know why? Because they're fighting against their own psychology instead of working with it. You don't need more intensity. You need less resistance. You need an approach that feels so manageable that you never have to talk yourself into doing it. Imagine for a second that improving a skill is like filling a bucket with water. The conventional approach says to pour as much water as possible, as quickly as possible, but most of it splashes out. The Kaizen approach says to add a steady drip that never stops. Which bucket fills first? The answer is obvious once you see it this way. Magic happens when you commit to daily tiny improvements. Your perception expands, your confidence builds, and the initial tiny changes gradually accelerate as your capabilities strengthen. This process isn't just psychological, it's neurological too. Your brain literally creates stronger neural pathways, becomes more efficient, more capable of performing complex tasks with less cognitive load. And here comes something even deeper. The more consistently you apply Kaizen to any skill, the more you build a meta-skill of learning itself. Do you want to know why some people seem to pick up new skills faster than others? It's not because they're naturally more talented. It's because they've mastered the process of mastery. They understand how to break down complex skills into tiny components, how to practice deliberately, how to build consistency before intensity. Now listen to this carefully. To truly grow, you must lose the fear of looking incompetent at the beginning. Society has taught you to avoid situations where you might fail or look foolish. But let me tell you something important. That's precisely where growth happens. The person who accepts their current limitations and focuses on tiny improvements is the one who eventually surpasses everyone who was too afraid to start. While others are paralyzed by the gap between where they are and where they want to be, you can use Kaizen to your advantage. Do you know how? By making the steps so small that they don't trigger fear or resistance. Want to learn public speaking? Don't start by signing up for a speech in front of hundreds. Start by recording yourself speaking for 30 seconds alone in your room. Want to learn a language? Don't commit to an hour of study daily. Start with learning just 3 words each day. Look at it this way. When you apply Kaizen correctly, you don't just develop skills, you develop something much more valuable: mastery over your own psychology. You become immune to the cycle of enthusiasm and burnout that traps most people, because you understand that consistent tiny actions are infinitely more powerful than occasional heroic efforts. Ask yourself something crucial right now. Why do most people feel frustrated with their skill development, even though they have access to more learning resources than ever before in human history? Simple. Because they never learned how to approach skill development correctly. They prefer dramatic changes over subtle shifts, intensity over consistency, complexity over simplicity. But you can't be like them. You have to learn to respect the power of small actions repeated without fail. And to achieve that, you'll need patience, the most underrated but crucial element of skill mastery. You need to trust the process when results aren't immediately visible, when progress seems too slow to matter. So here you are, standing at a decisive point. You have two options before you. Continue with the conventional approach of trying to transform yourself through sheer force of will and bursts of unsustainable effort, or embrace Kaizen, the art of making improvements so small they're almost trivial, but implementing them with unwavering consistency. The choice is completely yours, but remember one important thing. The path of dramatic change always ends in disappointment, because it fights against human psychology instead of working with it. The path of Kaizen seems underwhelming at first, but it's the only one that reliably gets results. So tell me, will you keep trying the same frustrating approach, or are you ready to embrace the counterintuitive power of small steps? Right now, think about something you may have never seriously considered. What if mastery isn't about rare moments of breakthrough, but about showing up day after day, making improvements so small they're almost invisible? What if the people you admire got where they are not through extraordinary talent or motivation, but through ordinary actions performed with extraordinary consistency? Have you realized this paradox? We celebrate the end results, the stunning performances, the impressive skills, the apparent overnight successes, but we rarely see or acknowledge the thousands of tiny steps that led there. This is exactly what keeps you frustrated. You're comparing your beginning or middle to someone else's end. Do you know why this happens? Because we're hardwired to notice dramatic changes and ignore gradual ones. We're drawn to stories of sudden transformation because they're more exciting than the reality of patient, incremental improvement. But let me assure you of something real. Meaningful change doesn't happen in bursts. It happens through accumulation. Imagine your skill development as a large wall. Each tiny improvement is a single brick. Most people quit because they place a few bricks and don't immediately see a wall. But those who understand Kaizen keep placing brick after brick, trusting that eventually a structure will emerge. They focus on the process of laying bricks correctly rather than constantly evaluating the incomplete wall. Now let me take you a little deeper to a place few are willing to visit, the problem of expectations. You know exactly what I'm talking about because you've felt it countless times. That disconnect between how quickly you think you should improve and how improvement actually happens. This gap, this mismatch of expectations, is perhaps the greatest obstacle you'll face in your skill development journey. Why? Because unrealistic expectations lead to disappointment, and disappointment leads to quitting. When you expect to see significant results after a week of effort, and those results don't materialize, your motivation plummets. But if you understand from the beginning that real progress is gradual, nearly invisible at first, you'll stay consistent long enough to experience the compound effect of small improvements. Do you want to know something no one has ever told you about true masters in any field? What truly made them great wasn't just their practice routine or techniques, it was their relationship with time. They understood something most people don't. That time will pass anyway. The question isn't whether you'll be 5 years older in 5 years. The question is, what skills you'll have accumulated in that time through daily tiny improvements. This perspective, this long-term thinking, is the very essence of Kaizen. It's what allows you to value small daily actions that seem insignificant in the moment, but transform your capabilities when accumulated. While society celebrates immediate results and quick fixes, The reality is quite the opposite. Sustainable growth requires patience. Listen closely to this. When you start applying Kaizen principles to any skill, don't expect to see dramatic results in days or even weeks. In fact, one of the most powerful aspects of this approach is the plateau of latent potential, a concept that explains why progress often seems non-existent at first, only to suddenly become visible after a consistency threshold is crossed. Now ask yourself this. How many times have you heard someone say they don't have time to develop a new skill? This is perhaps the most common and least valid excuse. The brutal truth is that Kaizen makes this excuse irrelevant. Why? Because the approach isn't about finding large blocks of time for practice. It's about consistently implementing tiny improvements that require minimal time. Have you realized that most people will happily waste 30 minutes scrolling through social media, but claim they have no time for deliberate practice? This contradiction is exactly what keeps you from developing the skills you want. Kaizen solves this by making the initial time commitment so small that the no-time excuse becomes impossible to believe even to yourself. Let me raise something even more uncomfortable, but deeply revealing. How much does your identity and self-image influence your approach to skill development? Have you ever thought, "I'm just not a math person," or "I don't have a talent for languages"? These fixed identity beliefs are poison to skill development. Kaizen offers a powerful alternative: identity-based improvements. Instead of focusing on the outcomes, speaking a language fluently, you focus on becoming the type of person who practices that language daily, even if just for a minute. The identity shift from "I'm learning French" to "I'm the type of person who practices French every day without fail" is subtle but transformative. Do you know what the greatest benefit of the Kaizen approach is? It makes success virtually inevitable if you stick with it. This means you'll have a huge psychological advantage because where others see practice as a burden, you'll see it as a simple, manageable daily habit. Where others feel overwhelmed by how far they have to go, you'll focus only on today's tiny improvement. And here's an interesting revelation. What do you think makes some people able to stick with skill development while others quit? They don't just practice differently, they think differently. They understand that mastery is a marathon, not a sprint. They value consistency over intensity. And most importantly, they measure their success not by comparing themselves to others, but by comparing themselves to who they were yesterday. But to get there, you need to let go of the cultural programming that says growth must be dramatic to be meaningful. You need to embrace the counterintuitive truth that the smallest action, repeated consistently, is infinitely more powerful than the grandest intention that remains inconsistent. So right now, you have to make a decision. Either continue chasing the myth of dramatic transformation and experience the familiar cycle of enthusiasm, followed by abandonment, or embrace Kaizen, the path of small, consistent actions that compound over time and lead to sustainable mastery. The decision is entirely yours. Just remember one thing: the deepest regret doesn't come from progressing slowly, it comes from quitting entirely. And trust me, the Kaizen approach, with its manageable daily actions, is the surest way to avoid that regret. And here we are, at the edge of a reality that few dare to accept. The path to mastering any skill isn't heroic or dramatic. It's ordinary, even boring at times. It's about showing up day after day, making improvements so small they're almost invisible, trusting that these actions, when compounded, create extraordinary results. There's something deeply liberating about embracing this truth. When you let go of the need for immediate, visible progress and focus instead on the process of daily, small improvements, you free yourself from the emotional roller coaster that derails most people's skill development efforts. Right now, as you hear these words, you have before you an opportunity that may never come again with the same clarity. The opportunity to fundamentally change how you approach learning and growth. It doesn't matter what methods you've tried until today, what failures you've experienced, or how many times you've given up. The real journey starts right now, in the instant you decide to embrace the power of small actions. I know it's tempting to think that others succeed because they have more talent, willpower, or time than you. But the only real difference between those who master skills and those who don't is their approach. Some understand and apply the principles of Kaizen, while others continue to chase the myth of overnight success. The world will never stop to wait for you to develop the skills you want. It moves forward, changes, evolves. Are you going to continue using approaches that fight against your psychology, or are you going to work with it using Kaizen principles? Look, here's the brutal truth. People quickly forget those who talk about the skills they're going to develop someday. But they can never forget those who quietly, consistently improve until their skills become undeniable. Those are the people who earn respect and recognition. Those are the people who transform not just their abilities, but their entire lives through the compound effect of small daily actions. So what are you going to do now? Because if you've come this far, you can't pretend you don't know what needs to change. You've understood the power of Kaizen. You've felt the appeal of its manageable approach. And now you only have one option. Take the first small step, a decisive, subtle, but powerful step toward becoming someone who values consistency over intensity, process over results, small improvements over dramatic transformations. So do it. Dare to be the person who trusts the process even when results aren't immediately visible. Dare to make improvements so small they seem insignificant, knowing that when compounded, they create mastery. Let your legacy be consistency, the most unsexy but undefeated approach to skill development ever discovered. If you've come this far, it means you're ready to transform how you approach skill development. But remember, this isn't the end. It's the real beginning. Because once you start applying Kaizen principles to one skill, you'll want to apply them to everything. And trust me, you won't regret it. To put Kaizen into practice immediately, start with these simple steps. First, choose one skill you want to improve. Just one. Trying to apply Kaizen to multiple skills at once is a recipe for overwhelm and abandonment. Second, break that skill down to its most basic component. If it's playing guitar, maybe it's just placing your fingers correctly on one chord. If it's writing, perhaps it's writing one sentence without self-criticism. Make it ridiculously small. Third, commit to improving just 1% every day. Remember, a 1% improvement is often invisible in the moment, but transformative when compounded. Fourth, create a can't-miss trigger for your daily practice. Link it to something you already do without fail, like brushing your teeth or drinking your morning coffee. Fifth, track your consistency, not your results. In the beginning, the goal isn't improvement that's visible to others. It's establishing the habit of showing up every day without fail. And finally, be patient with the plateau of latent potential. Understand that you may practice for weeks with little visible improvement, only to suddenly experience a burst of progress once you cross a threshold of neural adaptation. The beauty of Kaizen is that it works for absolutely any skill. Whether you're learning a language, improving at public speaking, developing a sports skill, or mastering a musical instrument, the principles remain the same. Make it small, make it daily, make it inevitable. If this message has resonated with you, if you feel like something inside you has shifted in how you view skill development, then join this growing community. Subscribe, activate the notifications, and be part of this movement towards sustainable skill mastery through small, consistent actions. And now I want to invite you to do something special. Leave this phrase in the comments to let me know you've made the decision to begin your true path. Today I commit to 1% daily improvement. Write it down, make it yours, commit to it. Because every time you do, you'll be reaffirming that you're no longer chasing the myth of overnight success. Remember something important. The world always belongs to those who understand the power of compound growth in investments, in relationships, and especially in skills. So don't wait any longer. This is your moment. This is your signal. Take the first small step, and I'll see you in the next video.